Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to Midweek in the City, where we look at the important questions of the day. And again, we're predicated upon Jesus' invitation to ask, seek, and knock. And so we're trying to do exactly that. This is the second to the last episode of Midweek in the City for this season. And I'm so glad you have joined us. And also, joining us tonight is, as always, our co-host, Megan Langen. And we are both very excited to welcome our guest for this evening, Beth Stanley, who is a licensed professional counselor, currently practicing at the Ecumenical Center, which is a great friend of First Baptist Church. We all know and love Mary Beth Fisk, who is the executive director of the Ecumenical Center, and we're so glad Beth is with us this evening. Welcome, Beth.
Thank you.
I'm so
I'm very glad
you're
to be here.
This is great. Now tonight, everybody, we're going to be talking about something that may seem quite weird to you if you don't already know about it. It still seems weird to me, and I do know about it. So, go figure. If you have ever wondered who you are and why you find certain things intriguing and other things repulsive, and why you tend to gravitate towards certain individuals or certain tasks and not others, then part of the reason is mystery, we don't know. The second part of the reason could be your Enneagram type. Now, that's what we're going to be looking at tonight, is this concept called the Enneagram, which is a systematized way of understanding some psychological realities about you and your personality type, and not just you, but also me, and not just you and me, but also Megan and Beth and everybody else that we call our society. So we're going to be looking at that this evening, and I also want to let you know that after our discussion here, as always, you can go on over to the Zoom chat. Just click the link, hop on the Zoom call, and both Beth and Megan will be there to field your questions and to have further discussion about the Enneagram. So I am really glad that y'all are going to be doing that. And again, Beth, welcome.
Yeah. Thank you.
Tonight. We're very excited to have you as a part of Midweek in the City. And I will just get us kicked off here with this question. First of all, what is this weirdness? The reason I say that is as I've mentioned, my daughter and my wife have been really into the Enneagram. And at first I thought, this is just another sort of fad, kind of thing. Like, are you a melancholy or a sanguine or, all those other kind of temperament sort of things. But then I began to see that there is some actual heft to this. So tell us about how you came to use the Enneagram. And really also, Beth, how it's helped you in your personal life as well as your professional practice. Can you give us a window into all of that?
Well, I love your word heft.
Okay, good.
Because that is actually what has most drawn me and kept me studying the Enneagram.
Okay.
Because there is so much heft and depth and breadth. It's much like the Bible, where you cannot stop plumbing the depths of this very divinely inspired tool.
Okay.
And so for me, as I continue to study and long to transform myself, this is a place where I can continually return because it provides a lit path for change. And this is what we are all wanting as Christians, as seekers, ask, seek, and find. We long to be whole and to be our true, authentic selves. And this space, this place allows us to find those nuggets that let us dive deep into ourselves and find our true selves.
Now, I'm going to tell you that I love your use of this phrase, lit path for change. I think that is kind of refreshing and intriguing, actually, and inviting. A lit path for change. Because it sounds like what you're talking about here and even advocating is not just that now we know who we are. It's that now we know a little bit more about ourselves so that we can move to where, how we're designed to live. We can move to this, towards greater wholeness, greater self-awareness, and perhaps some awareness of others. And along those lines, would you share with us a little bit about how you discovered the Enneagram? We're going to get into what it is later on, but I mean, did somebody mention it to you? Were you reading along one day and heard about it? How did you find this?
I have to go back just to say why I was so drawn to something that had the word personality in it. And so many years ago, many years ago, because I am older now.
How old are you?
Brian.
Totally kidding.
I know. I'm old. No, I'm not.
Join the club.
I am so grateful to be the age that I am, though, really. It makes me so grateful to be alive. So many years ago when I was at UT, and I was not necessarily sure what I was going to do. And I found myself in a personality theory class, and bells and whistles and lights started going off because I was like, could not get enough of this class. And I was fascinated.
Personality theories,
and just diving into understanding personality and the design of people. And it was like this, I didn't know anything about psychology at that point. And so it was the first time that I was actually seeing that there was like a blueprint and I kept thinking, I think maybe God did this. He blueprinted people with their ways, their DNA, their spiritual and emotional DNA. And then there were these theories that were describing that. And I was like, I am all in. And so I just dove in, and that became my major, and I couldn't get enough classes. And then I went on to take more classes and get some degrees. And through it all, I just continued to be fascinated with things that helped inspire change and understanding. And so all of those part of that spiritual journey led me to a convent where I spent probably 27 years with a beautiful spiritual director who continually led me into silence and into sitting with myself and God. And I remember still, this is back when there were tape recorders, and there was a little thing called a cassette that some people may have heard of. And there was this therapy called Divine Therapy by Thomas Keating. And I just still remember longing to be whole and longing to sit in silence and learn about God, myself, and whoever I was meant to be. And so in the course of that, I was led to people like Richard Rohr, who has written a book called The Enneagram, A Christian Perspective. And that became just a deep dive into learning more about myself and learning about, and this one, I have to say, just to back up a little, I had originally learned about the Myers-Briggs, which kind of tells you about, if you know anything about it, it talks about introversion and extroversion, and if you're a sensate or an intuitive person. And I gained a lot of power knowing who I was. I was a person that I kind of came across as somebody who liked to be with people and was trying to be sociable. But internally, I hated being with people. And I was like, what's wrong with me? And I would always be the person in the room who had the weirdest opinion and just kind of kept quiet, because I was always like that weird person in the back when they'd say, no one thinks this. I was like, I think that. So when I learned about the MBTI, the Myers-Briggs type inventory, and I found out what my type was, Sister Adeline said, you are one, there's only 10% of you like this. And I was like, oh, that's why I'm the only one in the room. And on top of it, I'm an introvert. I don't like being with people. Like, that's not where I get my energy. I need alone time. And it helped me so, it was just this, like, thank God, now I know myself.
Exactly.
But it was a little more static. And so, you kind of knew who you were, but that was just about all that I could do with it.
Yeah.
The Enneagram provides, when I say lit path, it's because it lights all the places of you. It's kind of like, here's what you could be. Here's what you are in stress. Here's what you are in when you're feeling great. And here's that dark side of you that comes up at places that are out of your control or seem to be out of your control. And somehow having that lit in me allowed me to see there's hope now, Beth. You might be able to have a moment where you can make different choices when the going gets tough. Or when that moment comes and it's irrational, maybe there's a way to grab hold of something true in you that God has put in you that you could actually then draw upon and be different and offer what we each are designed to offer. For me, it would be love. I mean, I think we all want to offer love, but we each have, and maybe we'll talk more about this, but we each have something that we're reflecting of God's character that we get to give out of our glory. So that's when I say lit path, it's like, may we all be lit up. And we may see some of the dark places, but in this perspective, it provides a compassionate, understanding look into those places.
Well, that is quite a window into that journey, and it's amazing. And I also want to say, Beth, that this is really you've hit on something that is probably fodder for further conversation, on another night, which is spiritual direction. And we've talked about that in some years past at Midweek in the City, but I didn't know that it was a long-standing practice of yours, several decades of spiritual direction. Very, very, very important practice and can be very helpful and enlightening in many people's lives. So thank you for letting us in on that. And there's yet more to come on this Enneagram.
Yeah. So our group, there's a wide range, and even just here on the stage, there's a wide range of, some people know their number, they are deeply down, into the Enneagram library, and then some are like, I have no idea what that is, I've never heard of that, and kind of everything in between. So could you just give us a brief breakdown of what is the Enneagram, how does it work?
Okay.
Just a context for everything.
Sure. So I know, and there's a wide range. So some of this will be, repeat for some people who are like, oh, yeah, I've heard it. I could teach it myself. But the Enneagram is Ennea, meaning 9, and gram, meaning a drawing. So it becomes, if we had a diagram, we'd have a circle that has 9 points on it.
We'll draw one for the Q&A.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So,
good.
And the 9 is at the top. So each one of those dots represents a type of personality. And the Enneagram describes a personality. Personality coming from the word persona, which is actually the word for mask. And so
It's the word for mask?
Yes.
That's interesting.
I know, because we think that we've been stamped with our personality, when the Enneagram, in this very, I think, mystical, mysterious way, teaches us that what our personality isn't actually the essence of who we are. It's more what we have learned, how we have learned to survive our lives, how we've learned to fit in, how we've learned to please our caregivers, how we've learned to be okay in culture. We have all adopted, out of our deepest desires and fears, we have all adopted a personality that has made our lives work, and yet not made our lives work. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, yes,
So
absolutely.
And so the Enneagram is that. So it's that circle of 9 types. And here's where it gets to be why it's dynamic and why it's ever changing and allows us to kind of catch the nuances of our personality is because each number has a number on each side, which you may have heard is called the wings. And so we don't just have the energy of our personality. Megan, if you're a 9, you aren't just a 9. Right. You lean towards one either, and if you see the circle, you guys will see the circle, on each side of the 9 is a 1 and an 8. And so many people will say that for part of your life, you are going to lean towards one number, one wing, and at the second half of your life, you may be cultivating the other side. And that means just drawing on the nature of that other wing, the nature or the energy of that other wing.
And it reflects the dynamics of the act of how a life is actually lived.
Exactly.
Rather than just a snapshot. Yeah.
It really, you call upon, it's almost like your soul calls upon another part of the energy.
Right. You summon that, when
somehow it's like my husband, who's a 9, can lean towards the 8, which is a very,
that's me as well.
Is that you? So how odd it is to be this peace-seeking, unity-loving person, and yet you have that challenger in you, which is a beautiful combination, but complicated. Because when the 8 does its thing, the 9's like, wait, what just happened?
Yeah, and I, have no idea what you're talking about.
There you go. Sorry, I know, that's, yes.
What I want to ask is, will you give us a thumbnail sketch of the types, 1 through 9?
Yes. Well, just a PSA for those listening, we don't want to, I don't want you to hear this and say, well, that doesn't sound like me, after just a couple sentences of each number, because there is so much, and it's really better to, self-type and read through it and learn about it.
Right.
So I don't want, I want to warn against
a
quick, reaction or something that would cause you to say, well, that's not me, and throw that out. There's so much depth to all of these things, but it is helpful to have, the kind of the highlights of each number as we discuss this.
Right, just so that we can have some kind of a hook here to know what we're talking about. But absolutely, please heed that warning. Your mileage may vary, so please go ahead.
And objects in the mirror appear larger than they are.
While we're on motorist metaphors,
yes.
we'll
and to echo that, Megan, I love that because many people, it takes a while to kind of land on your number. And so we'll talk a little bit more later about how people can, maybe hone in a little bit. But just a thumbnail. I love that idea, thumbnail. And so I think what I'll do is talk about the desires and the fears of each number that kind of guide the personality and the energy of that person. Okay. So we'll start with the 1, who is called the reformer. And the 1 is a person who is a principled, purposeful, perfectionistic person.
This is like a Martin Luther. No, I'm kidding. A reformer. Anyway.
So their greatest desire is to be good and to live in integrity. They want to have virtue. Their greatest fear is that they would be a failure, that they would be defective, that they would, they're always trying to avoid blame or fault. Okay. So to make a mistake is death to this person.
Yeah.
That's a number 1. Number 2 is called the helper. And number 2 is a demonstrative, warm, caring person whose greatest desire is to feel loved and wanted. Their greatest fear is to feel unloved and unwanted or unworthy of love. And so that is often what motivates the 2. The 2 also avoids their own needs because their needs might make them feel unworthy of love. A 3 is called the achiever, and this is a person who wants to look good and wants to succeed, and at all costs will do whatever they have to try to succeed. And they present well, and they try to avoid failure. Their greatest fear is failure or not having an opportunity to shine. Four is also called the individualist, and their greatest desire is to feel significant and to feel unique and extraordinary. They are sensitive and creative, and they're the ones that they most fear just being ordinary or just like a cog in a machine, feeling insignificant. A five is called an investigator, and they are the ones that are analytical, innovative, pioneering. Their greatest desire is to be capable and competent. Their greatest fear is to be forced into risk taking and to feel useless or incapable. A six is a loyalist. They're called the loyalist. They're the committed, responsible one who can create community, and they are also the ones who notice potential worst case scenarios. They fear at all costs. They fear being abandoned or neglected, or being in a place where there's uncertainty. I think I'm not sure if I said this. The desire of the six is that they would have security and support always. Okay. Seven, the enthusiast. This is a person who is distractible, always trying to avoid pain, often trying to avoid pain. They're the fun-loving, adventure-seeking person whose greatest desire is satisfaction and happiness. Their greatest fear is boredom or being trapped or being deprived. So the eight is also known as the challenger. This is the person who can come across as confrontational, but this is the powerful, dominant person, and they most desire control and safety. So their greatest fear is that they would be violated or manipulated, or that they would feel weak or vulnerable.
Okay.
And then the nine is the peacemaker. And this is the person who they're unity-seeking, laid-back individuals who most desire harmony and peace, and they'll do anything to accommodate such things. Their greatest fear would be that they would be separated from others or that they would be in conflict. So that's kind of a thumbnail sketch of all nine.
That's absolutely fascinating. And I think I've heard some of that before, but just to hear it laid out like that is really, really intriguing.
Yeah, no, that's perfect to get a little snapshot of all of these, because I know we'll dig a little deeper into that, but you did a good job of highlighting the fears and the exceptional qualities of all of these. And when we look at the wheel, you know, the best parts or the core things of each number are all attributes of God, right? And that's what I love about the Enneagram is, like you said, it's not just a prescriptive thing. It's much more active. And so when we learn about our number and, you know, the way we connect to God, the way we, you know, shine certain aspects of the character of God, we can recognize that more in other people. And so, you know, I can appreciate the way a two would do that in a way that I don't find natural. And so that explanation is very helpful.
I love the way you're bringing that up, that we all do reflect, we all reflect a part of God's Spirit differently. We all reflect, He has all those qualities, and then we are just His body reflecting those beautiful parts of His character.
Yeah.
Big
so
time.
do you, and I don't even know all of this, the origins of the Enneagram, where did this come from? You know, it's gotten so popular in the last few years, and I don't really know exactly. I know it has roots in Christian principles and those things, but can you talk to us about where this came from?
So I know it sounds like it might be a mystery where exactly it began, but what I love about the story is that Riso and Hudson, you may have heard of them. They are two men who've written extensively, and I love the way they've described the mystical, mysterious, divine quality of the Enneagram and how it has been sustained through thousands of years. So they believe that it came from Evagrius and Pythagoras, and they were from the kind of 300s and 500s AD, and the idea being that they may have laid the foundation for the 7 deadly sins. And so then taught that, helped the desert mothers and fathers to understand then the 7 deadly sins.
Yeah.
And each of the deadly sins does correspond to one of the numbers. And so they believe that that was kind of the foundation. Then in the early 1900s, George Gurdjieff, who was a very fascinating, eccentric, mystical philosopher, created I think the diagram, and then through that he taught a path of awakening, which is very beautiful because that's very much what the Enneagram is meant to do, is awaken us. Like
Sure.
a lot of times teachers will talk about being asleep to ourselves.
Yeah.
And so the awakening is much what Gurdjieff did. Then in the 70s, Claudio Naranjo and Ichazo, these were men that were in South America, and they then began to bring modern psychology into it, and then Naranjo brought it to California, to the United States, where then it was kind of began to be dispensed to spiritual directors, retreat people,
Got it.
seminarians, and then it started to take off. And Richard Rohr wrote a book, and then Don Rizzo, Russ
Yeah.
Hudson, Beatrice Chestnut, Helen Palmer, and then Ian Morgan Cron and Suzanne Stabile are 2 that have written a primer book, The Road Back to You. And so it's just kind of through maybe the past 100 years has started to. One piece of it that I found to be interesting is that I think when it began, when it came to the seminarians, there were some priests that believed that maybe it shouldn't be used. Maybe it should just be used for the directors, not the directees to know.
Oh, okay.
And so it was kind of like this. They withheld some of the information, it seemed. And so
Right.
it's nice that it's at least blossomed to where we can all kind of begin to deep dive into it as
Right.
opposed to just kind of receiving direction. So that's my understanding kind of from the different places I've learned.
That's a broad-based origin story. It is intriguing that Pythagoras and some others in the Greek philosophical tradition would have had their hand somewhere on the foundations of this. We were just talking the other day about how Greek thought plowed the human psyche and how it prepared the human race really for. It was one of the ways that God used thought and ideas to prepare the human race for Christ and for these ideas. You know, Paul himself, St. Paul, was very influenced by Greek thought and even quoted Greek literature in Acts in his speech before the gathered folks there at the Areopagus when he gave witness to Christ's resurrection. And so we know that Paul was profoundly influenced. We know that later that Thomas Aquinas, Augustine baptized Plato, you know, in many ways, and then Thomas Aquinas later on really brought Aristotle's teaching back to the West and harmonized it with Christian teaching. And so it's just interesting that something like this would also find early on in the mists of ancient history common footing with the Greek thinkers. And then, as you said, this was impressive and impactful for the desert mothers and fathers as well, although not in its current form.
But it does make you wonder, in terms of what you're describing, that God was preparing,
Absolutely.
and that part of his story and part of his story to our salvation and our wholeness and us becoming one with him was that we would have a deeper understanding
Absolutely.
of ourselves. And so it harkens me back to what I learned from Rizzo and Hudson about their belief that there is something true and right and divine,
Yeah, that's
divinely
right.
inspired about
Oh,
this, that it's continued to live.
Evidence keeps cropping up that is the case, and it's just very, very interesting. Your own spiritual journey, your own spiritual life, Beth, how has the Enneagram impacted that and helped you in your appropriation of your spirituality?
So, for me to be able to look at the dark places of the shadow side, is what it's sometimes called, to be able to look at the dark side of my heart at times, and to be able to have hope there has made all the difference in the world.
Yeah.
To be able to know that when I am at my worst, there is something hopeful about looking at the why and understanding what's happening, and then being able to see a vision where it might not be that way.
I love that because so often we do feel like we're at the mercy of forces that we know nothing about. We're at the mercy of things roiling inside of us. We're at the mercy of what other people do. We feel that we are. And ultimately, even though those assembled here may be Christians, practically speaking, it then feels like we're at the mercy of a faceless universe. But our faith teaches us that that's not the case, that at the center of the universe is a personality, is a person, and it's God. And it's not, we're not at the mercy of the universe, we're at the mercy of God. And so to look at some things that are true of you and say, I understand this a little bit more, I can see how that is hopeful.
And also to see that light, to see as Megan was describing so beautifully about this is a reflection of God's
Absolutely.
character. And so there's that light and there's that dark, but there's that realization that getting to the light then is this hopeful process of then really accessing the greatest glory within, which is our true self. And when we're truly connected to who we're meant to be,
That's right.
that living out that kind of energy and that kind of power is very freeing and can be so transformative. And there's very few things that I have found that are that contain as much potential traction for growth as the Enneagram, as seeing different opportunities for choice and change, that
Right.
and a shift in energy in your soul.
That's right.
We're talking a little bit about compassion,
That's right.
and there's something about when you have a compassionate understanding of yourself, there is a change. It is almost an antidote for shame and for the feeling of
That's right.
angst that we sometimes get when we are left to our own devices or to this faceless universe that
Yes.
seems to be, thrusting itself upon us.
Absolutely.
And now more than ever do we feel the power of the world, the forces of the world. And so to be able to say, even in this, I can find a path that is transformative, is very inspiring and hopeful.
We need to hear that. We need to hear that.
Yeah. Yeah, I've noticed even in the last few months, just, with the anxiety that this year has brought and those things, I hadn't thought about the Enneagram in a while, and I realized, I am all the way down over here living in my stress number, but I realized, when I kind of put on that lens again, no, I do have some control here. One, over how I react, how I, lean into the Lord in one way or another, how I choose to react to those things. There is a level of power that these things help you kind of regain. And I think that's something that I had kind of lost until the last few weeks. And I was like, no, there's, I can choose how I respond to this, and
so I love that you're bringing up that up, Megan. And so just to kind of piggyback on that, in case I'm not sure how much time we have, but just to get into the idea that I love what you recognized about yourself, which is, no, I can choose. So when you know where you go in security, so if you look at the circle and you know whatever number you are, when you know where you go in security, you can actually hope for and look to that number's strengths and to try to see that does, and oftentimes, and you're maybe finding this, that feels right.
Yeah.
That feels good to me to be in that place, for you, to be in that, motivated, I can do this kind of mentality, and right action and feeling that power. It's so good. It's engaging. It's kind of like, okay, I can do something different.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah, I'm not just a victim to everything
Yeah,
that
Exactly.
yeah.
rolls over me. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
That's right.
And these types, each kind of manifest different forms of, utility and different things. And I know Brian and I were talking about this. Sometimes we say like, oh, well, that person's an unhealthy 9, or this person's just a super healthy 2, or, whatever it is. And that can be a little unhelpful or pathologizing, or, but nonetheless, could you just talk us through or help us understand what these kind of descriptions are intending to do, how we kind of navigate some of this language with the types?
Well, I think I hear in the question that it comes from people who are just learning the Enneagram and maybe are saying things like, that's an unhealthy.
Right,
I
right,
rarely
exactly, yeah.
hear that coming from people that are well-versed or well-studied in it.
So they're not there sitting there going, oh, well, you're just an unhealthy 7 or whatever.
I would say that because any of us, so part of the teaching of the Enneagram is to have kind of 3 different levels of, if they would say, health. And really, I would say it's more about awareness or how awake you are to yourself. Because when you're very awake to yourself, you're making choices for love and for compassion and care, and it's those are very different choices than when you're half awake or not awake.
Right.
And so I would say, just to kind of reframe the word unhealth, it's about awakeness.
And that was my question, by the way, because I've heard people describe it that way. Yeah.
And it does end up sending a negative message to people. I've heard it too. I've heard people say, well, she's just an 8. She's behaving badly.
Yeah, right.
And it's like, no, there's a moment, this is almost an opportunity for understanding what circumstances, what context. Because, by the way, anyone can be in a low place.
Right.
We could leave this building and get in a low
You
place.
bet. You bet.
And so it's really in the moment, understanding the context. And this is kind of what we're talking about, and being able to, the more awake we are to ourselves, the more we can, when we're in a stressful situation, when we're in stress, knowing, okay, blood pressure is rising. We talk about this with our anxiety. It's
That's
like,
right.
what do we do when we feel the sweat, the heart rate, the fast breathing? I'm starting to do it right now because I'm losing. I can't talk anymore. I've lost my train of thought. Anyway, you know what I'm saying? Like,
absolutely.
We take a moment, we get under stress, and that's where we maybe land irrationally, out of control, in an unhealthy place, which is more just to say, in an unaware place, because something took over.
And then we can see that in other people and go, don't just plaster the word unhealth on somebody. Just say, understand this person is under stress. Dietrich Bonhoeffer said, we must learn to regard others not in terms of what they do, not in light of what they do or fail to do for us, but in light of what they suffer. We must learn to regard others basically in light of what they suffer, not in terms of what they do or fail to do for us. And that tracks with this kind of thing. The more we understand about who we are, the more we can be courageous enough to say, oh, I can see that you are suffering.
I love that.
Yeah.
Yes.
So,
Does that help the
Yes.
question? Do you have, is there
Yeah.
more
No, I
to
think
that?
and I forget that, the levels of awakeness or awareness, I think is super helpful
Yeah.
language. Because I can even fall into that. Well, I'm just, you can't just chalk it up to a bad day or, living into a stereotype or not. And so I think, yeah, how aware I am of myself in the world
Right.
in relation to other people, that's not always going to be a, a perfect 10 every day. But I think learning how to say, how awake I am to myself, how awake I am to what the Spirit is doing, I think that's super helpful.
And maybe what the circumstance is.
Right.
Are you in stress?
Right.
Then it may be that you are on the low side of your stress number.
Right.
And that is just a natural, organic response. Usually, the stress number that you go to actually is the opposite of who you normally are as a 9. And so, same with me, I'm this warm, loving person until I'm in stress, and then I'm an 8, and my fists are up, and I'm pounding people.
Yeah.
Or at least
Yeah.
wanting to.
Right.
That is the complete opposite of who I'm used to being, but that
Right.
lets me know I'm in stress.
Yeah.
And for each number, it is the exact same. And so to understand the context of and the place where we may be going out of natural survival.
Yeah.
It's about survival. So it just provides a context of understanding, hopefully, and
Absolutely.
then compassion.
And I had this question here about having more grace for each other. Well, that's it. I mean, that exactly is the place that will help us land, is grace for other people if we take this kind of thing seriously. The relationship between the Enneagram and counseling, how do you find its utility there? Just is it useful in your practice? What do you do with the Enneagram in that?
I allow, much like Sister Adeline did with me a little bit, is that I allow the momentum of our time to inform me of how ready someone may be for the Enneagram. And so there are times when it feels like it's just fruit ready to be picked, like somebody really will benefit from understanding more of themselves. And when that's the case, there is great traction, and people can be truly enlightened and inspired. Not everyone is interested in learning about themselves in that way.
In that way, right.
Right.
Exactly.
For me, it's useful because it's kind of always in the back of my mind. It's a little bit of a paradigm that I can't help but view.
So it informs how you approach your field.
It does. And it allows me to see the potential in a person. I love being able to see someone, like to really see their glory. It's like, you see people and you're like, I love who you are. You may be in angst, you may be in turmoil, but you start to see when you actually can kind of begin to have this framework that allows you to go, oh, I wonder if you are a 9. I see that. I see why this is causing turmoil. And then being able to see the person and to be able to imagine who they might become when they're fully living out their freedom. And that's the part I love, is being able to envision who they might be outside of that struggle.
That's just great. And that's an awful lot like God, isn't it? To be able to see the potential in somebody, because God knows who He has made, and we can regard one another in that way. And that's not just for counselors then. I mean, what you're talking about, Beth, we could all take part in that, help having something like that to help inform our regard of other people.
Yeah.
I mean, wow.
Yes. There was a time where I used to work with, back when I was in Houston, we worked with churches where we were trying to collect people that were interested in having these kinds of authentic, real life conversations about the heart issues, so that people didn't necessarily have to go to a counseling office. And so this is, like we had like a lay counseling ministry where we were trying to teach people how to do not necessarily counseling, but lovingly listening,
Yes.
and with
yes.
that ear to the sacred, with that reverence of holy suffering, with all of that can happen within our communities. And I just love what you're saying, that really for all of us, if we can kind of if we have something that helps us understand people more, then
Yes.
our relationships can become richer and
Ah.
more in depth, and maybe more free to love and free to share and free to go to those dark, deep places and find connection.
That what you were describing sounds like a listening ministry, and I would go to that, if somebody just listen to me, please.
Right.
That's
Right.
so great,
Right.
really great.
Right.
Well, do we risk shortcutting getting to know people if we use the Enneagram as a label? He's a 9, she's a 2, whatever.
I think that's a great question. I think it's a temptation to think you know someone because you know their number. And it reminds me of how we are sometimes with certain Bible stories, oh yeah, that's John 3:16. No, I've heard it,
Right,
or,
right.
and
we do that with a lot of things,
we
don't
do that with a lot of things. And one of the things that, again, we're just talking a lot about spiritual direction accidentally. I
Yeah,
did not mean
yeah.
to, but
I'm
it's like
telling you.
I was thinking about Lectio Divina, which is a
Oh, yeah.
sacred reading technique. And it's this way of sitting with a open heart, with a meditative spirit, and being contemplative about the truth, whatever truth you're soaking in. And I think the same thing with people. It's like being in a Lectio mindset with people and being able to allow yourself to be impacted by
That's-
what kind of, I am curious about what your 9-ness looks like.
Right.
I'm
And
curious
that's the
about.
best way to put that. I'm just telling you,
Yeah.
I'm curious about what that looks like for
'Cause
you.
that is, we forget, and I forget this sometimes, because when we are tempted to say, well, that person's a 4, or this person's
Yeah.
whatever, that's the opposite intent of the Enneagram.
It
But
is.
also,
Exactly.
like we said, it's not prescriptive. So for me, being a 9, that looks really different from the next person that's a 9, that manifests differently, that,
Right.
it doesn't take away individuality or, the uniqueness of our person. It just is a lens from which we
It is
Right.
a
see the world
lens.
and those things, because there's some there's stereotypes for a reason, but sometimes a person who's a 2 isn't going to fit into all of those things.
Yeah.
But learning why they don't, or there's so much depth to when we choose to lean into that and not just
Yeah.
say, well, I know who you are because you're
You-
this number.
You're a 9. Tell me more.
Right.
That kind of thing.
yeah.
If it would
I
spur
love how
us
you
on to
said that's the exact opposite.
Yeah,
I mean, that you're exactly right. That's the exact opposite. And just to whet people's appetite, the reality of being a 9, whatever number you are, is that there's other opportunities for knowing deeper parts of yourself. Like there's subtypes, and there's ways that you show up that are different from you as a 9 is very different from maybe Linda.
Right,
And
right.
that's another beautiful place to explore understanding yourself more, again, just so that you understand and can be compassionate with yourself.
Oh.
And therefore understanding why you are the way you are. So
Absolutely.
I think that's what I've gotten most out of the Enneagram is compassion for others, but compassion for myself too. Because there's so
Yes.
many things that, for so long I was like, why am I like that? Or why do I do that? Why
Yeah.
can't I just get a grip or whatever it is? And then I'll listen to a podcast or read a book about it, and I'm like, I'm not the only one, first of all. And there's a reason for that. And that's something I can get past,
Yeah.
with personal work and those things. And so, yeah, it really does free you up to say, I don't have to, be stuck in this box, or I don't have to.
And that is so important. This whole concept, we've raised it several times, of self-compassion, because everybody says, "What's wrong with me? What's wrong with me?" And we would not wish that on anybody, certainly on somebody we love. We don't want that person to say. We would say, "Well, don't you don't have to do that." But yet, when it comes to ourselves, we think we've got to have a really hard line, and that's just simply not true.
Right.
And it's detrimental.
Right. Yeah. And I know we're kind of we're nearing the end of our time here, but as we go forward and before we jump into the Q&A, how can people find out their number? If they're new to this, what would you suggest for kind of beginning that journey and how to learn more about the Enneagram?
So a few things. One, what we've done tonight, which is to talk about the various numbers, to read about them. There are some good primer books that are easy to access, or just a website. One of the greatest websites, there's a couple of different ones, EnneagramInstitute.com and Truity.com. They both have tests that you can take, which is not necessarily the first route to go, though it can provide a little insight into where you might lean. But more in depth is to not so much understand your behavior, but to understand why you do what you do. And so that may come from talking with someone, asking family members, friends, or journaling, and really kind of going, okay, these are some of the behaviors I may be seeing in myself, which may make me look like this kind of number. Why do I do what I do?
Right.
Because that's really the Enneagram is the motivation, is kind of those desires and fears that we talked about earlier. That's really why we do what we do, is what kind of hones in what number we are. And then lastly, the working with people, and I think communal talking and sharing and going through either a book or a study, and really deep diving into an exploration for the purpose of becoming whole, and really thinking how really having a heart that wants to be awake and live awake and aware, and to be whole, to be your true self, to be your authentic self, no mask. Like we started talking about personality, but
That's
it's
right.
like, how do we take the mask off
That's
and just be the essence of who we are meant to be?
I love that.
Yeah.
So necessary. Beth, thank you for being
Yeah.
here. This has been enlightening. It's been very eye-opening for me, and it's been a kind of a journey, that is taking some large steps today with this conversation. So I appreciate that so much, and I know that's helped bring some light to a lot of our listeners. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having
that.
me. It's been a joy to talk to you both.
Well, this is an honor for us, and everybody. We hope you've enjoyed this conversation with Beth Stanley. This conversation actually will continue now on Zoom. So click the Zoom link. You can find it on FBCSA Single Adults Facebook page. I think it's going to be there, right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. And click the link and join Beth along with Megan on that conversation, and that will be a time of Q&A for some further enlightenment about the Enneagram, some further conversation. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We'll see you here next week. Good night.